Most people will tell you that confidence is something you build, that you wake up and choose it, that you affirm it into existence, that you stand in front of the mirror and say the right things until eventually you believe them. They'll tell you self worth is something you have to earn back, that you need to challenge your negative thoughts, reframe your self talk, slowly prove to yourself that you are enough. But what if the problem was never inside of you? What if your confidence was never actually missing? What if someone just kept turning it down? Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, one adjustment at a time, until you forgot how bright you used to be. And the reason affirmations don't work isn't because you're not trying hard enough. It's because you cannot affirm your way out of a dynamic that is still actively turning the dial. Once you understand who had access to the switch and how they used it, building your confidence stops being a mindset project and starts being a power reclamation. And here's the first thing to understand. This isn't everywhere. Your confidence doesn't disappear in every room. Your self-worth doesn't feel negotiable in every environment. You don't second guess yourself with every person you meet. It shows up selectively. In the job, where you outworked everyone around you, stayed later, carried more, delivered consistently, and watched someone else get the position anyway. In the relationship, where you poured in fully, your time, your energy, your presence, and slowly started feeling like your contribution was expected rather than valued. In the friendship, where you used to show up as yourself until you noticed the environment shifted from supportive to evaluative, and you started monitoring what you shared because you weren't sure how it would land. It shows up in specific rooms with specific people under specific conditions. That selectivity is not a character flaw. It is evidence. Evidence that your confidence and self-worth were never the problem. The environments that held the dial and the people inside them who kept adjusting it, those are where the diagnosis actually lives. Self-worth and confidence erosion is not a mindset problem. It is what happens when a system absorbs everything you bring to it. Your skills, your effort, your presence, your vision, and returns so little that over time, you start to forget what you were bringing in the first place. You don't wake up one day with low confidence. You wake up one day and realize that the things that used to feel like you, the hobbies you loved, the goals you had, the version of yourself that had direction and fire, have been sitting on the back burner for so long, you almost forgot they were there. Think about the last time you were fully in something that was yours. Not something the system needed, not something someone else required of you, something that belonged entirely to you. For a lot of women in this dynamic, that moment feels like a long time ago. And here's what happened in between. You didn't decide to abandon yourself. You redirected. You showed up where you were needed. You filled the gaps. You carried the weight. And every degree of energy that went into the system was the degree that didn't go back into you. That isn't a discipline failure. That isn't a lack of self-love. That is what happens when your power keeps flowing out and nothing flows back in. And when your power is constantly redirected outward, your authority in your own life starts to weaken. And the confidence that used to live in knowing who you were and what you were capable of started to dim. This didn't happen suddenly. Think of it like a dimmer switch. Not a light being switched off, a dial being turned down. When a dimmer switch is at full brightness, the room is lit. Everything is visible. You can see clearly. You know where you are. But when someone starts turning that dial slowly, one small adjustment at a time, the room doesn't go dark immediately. It just gets slightly less bright, then slightly less again, then less again. And because each adjustment is small, you adapt. Your eyes adjust to the new level. You start to operate in the dimmer light as if it were normal. Until one day you look up and realize you can barely see. And you can't remember the last time the room was fully lit. That is what happened to your confidence. It didn't disappear in one conversation. It didn't leave after one bad experience. It got turned down every time the system you were invested in failed to return what you put in. Every time you outworked everyone around you and the recognition went somewhere else, the dial turned. Your leverage in that environment quietly transferred to someone else's position. Every time you showed up fully in a relationship that had stopped fully showing up for you, the dial turned. The leverage in that dynamic shifted further from your hands. Every time you brought something to a friendship and felt it land in judgment instead of support, the dial turned. Every time your fitness, something that was yours, something that gave you power and discipline and identity, got pushed aside because the system needed something from you first, the dial turned. Not dramatically, not all at once, one small adjustment at a time, until the brightness you used to operate at started to feel like a memory rather than a present reality. That is not who you became. That is what a system does when it keeps taking and stops giving back. So ask yourself honestly, who was actually benefiting from you operating at a reduced brightness? Because it wasn't you. Think about the workplace, where your over delivery became the standard, where your output held up the team, where your consistency made everyone around you look more capable than they actually were. Your high performance at reduced confidence meant you worked harder to prove what should have been obvious. You over-delivered to compensate for the self-doubt the environment created. And the people who were supposed to recognize that didn't, or did and chose not to act on it. Because a woman who believes in herself fully negotiates differently, advocates differently, takes up space differently. She holds leverage in her own position. A woman operating at reduced brightness is easier to overlook, easier to pass over, easier to keep exactly where she is. Her leverage stays low because her confidence isn't backing it up. Think about the dynamic where your presence became expected rather than valued, where your effort was absorbed as if it were the baseline rather than the contribution it actually was. When you stop believing that what you bring matters, you stop requiring that it be acknowledged. And the system that was running on your contribution got to keep running without ever having to account for the cost to you. Think about the friendship where you started editing yourself, where you stopped sharing certain things, where the version of you that showed up was smaller than the version that existed. That edited version required less reciprocity, easier to be around, less likely to need something back. Every time your confidence dimmed, someone, somewhere got to operate without your full authority in the room. Every time your self-worth eroded, someone got to set the terms of what you were worth in that dynamic. Your reduced brightness was someone else's leverage. Your lack of authority in that space gave them the leverage gap they needed, and they held it for as long as you kept the dial low. And here's what most people don't realize. The dial doesn't stay down on its own. You've been holding it there. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but every time you stayed in an environment that turned you down and said nothing, every time you kept pouring into a system that wasn't returning the investment, every time you let someone else's assessment of your worth go unchallenged, you were participating in keeping the dial low. And every time you did that, you gave the dynamic more power than you held over yourself. You thought you were being patient. You thought you were being loyal. You thought you were giving it time. What you were actually doing was handing the dynamic permission to keep operating at the brightness level it preferred for you. The fitness you stopped doing, that wasn't just a habit you lost. That was a source of power you stopped assessing, and every day you didn't go back to it was a day the system stayed more comfortable. The goals you put on hold, those weren't just postponed dreams. Those were evidence of a self that had direction, and as long as they stayed on hold, the system didn't have to compete with them. The version of you that knew what she wanted and moved toward it, she was inconvenient for a dynamic that needed you redirected. And somewhere along the way, you started maintaining her absence without realizing that's what you were doing. Now ask yourself this. Not every area in your life, just one. Where have you been operating at a fraction of your actual brightness and calling it humility? And what would actually change if you stop adjusting yourself to fit the level the environment set for you? Now I want to prepare you for what happens when you start turning the dial back up, because it is going to feel like a battle you almost lose every single day before it starts to feel like freedom. When you start redirecting energy back towards yourself, when you get back to your fitness, the goals, the hobbies, the version of yourself that existed before the system consumed you, it does not feel natural immediately. It feels like withdrawal. Your body feels off, restless, unsettled, like something you were used to doing is suddenly missing. Because participation in the system became its own kind of dependency. Being needed felt like purpose. Overfunctioning felt like contribution. Staying small felt like safety. So when you stop, even when stopping is the correct move, your body does not register relief. It registers disruption. And that discomfort will try to resolve itself. Now note this, the system will not respond loudly. There would not be a conversation about it. No acknowledgement that anything has changed. No one saying they notice you redirecting. It will move like nothing happened. Like you will be back. Like this version of you that is reclaiming her time and her priorities is temporary. And the way you will know, the acts will keep coming. Small ones, casual ones. The kind that do not feel significant enough to say no to. Can you just handle this one thing? It won't take long. You're the only one who knows how to do this. That is not a coincidence. That is the system checking whether the loop is still running. Checking whether it still has access to your power. And whether your authority is fully reclaimed yet. Whether you are still accessible. Whether the dial is still within reach. And this is where the real battle lives. Not in the axe itself and what happens inside you when the axe comes in. Because the moment someone needs something from you, the negotiation starts. It'll only take a minute. It's not really distracting me. I can get back to my own things after. It won't set me back that much. That is not logic. That is the pull. That is the dependency trying to reactivate. Because participation in the system created its own kind of high. Being needed felt like purpose. So when that feeling shows up again, even through a small act, it does not feel like pressure. It feels like something you are supposed to respond to. And if you are not aware, you will step back into it thinking you made a harmless decision. But you did not. You fed the loop. Their behavior is not the signal. Your reaction is. And their discomfort is not your diagnosis. Stay with yourself anyway. Self-worth and confidence do not come back through affirmations. They come back through action. Specifically through the action of going back to your own things, even when you do not feel ready. even when the system still needs something from you, even when the version of you that used to do those things feels unfamiliar. You go back anyway, because reclaiming your time is how you rebuild power, and holding that time is how you reestablish authority. Not because you feel confident, because you are reclaiming the source of where your confidence actually lived. The fitness you stopped. Go back. Not when you are ready, now. Every session is leverage, building back into your own position. The goal you postponed. Start it. Not when the conditions are right, now. Every step toward it is authority returning to your own life. The hobby that got consumed. Reclaim time for it. Not when you have more time, now. That is leverage building in your own universe. Time, energy, and attention being redirected back into what compounds for you. Because here is what nobody tells you about rebuilding confidence. It does not arrive before the action. It arrives because of the action. And this is what it starts to look like in real time. You finally sit down to do something that belongs to you, something that moves your life forward. And right in the middle of it, something comes in, a message, a call, a small act, nothing urgent, just familiar. And for a second, the old response shows up. I can just handle this real quick. It won't take long. I'll get back to this after. But this time, you do not follow it. You do not explain. You do not adjust. You do not make space for it. You simply say, I'm not available for that right now. And you go back to what you were doing. Not because it felt easy, but because you chose not to re-enter the loop. And that right there is where the shift actually happens. Not in what you said and what you did not do. Because every time you do not respond the way the system expects, you weaken the pattern. And every time you return to something that belongs to you, you strengthen yourself. And that is how the dial moves back up. Not dramatically, consistently. And the confidence that returns is not something you created. It is something you proved. And that is the part that changes the question. Because if your confidence starts returning the moment you go back to yourself, then maybe the real question was never, how do I get my confidence back? Maybe the real question is, who had their hand on the dial long enough to make you think it was gone? But confidence was never something you lost. You had it. You know you had it. You can remember the version of yourself that moved through the world with a sense of direction and clarity and self-assurance that felt completely natural. That version of you didn't disappear. Someone just kept turning her down. Read that back. You didn't lose your confidence. You didn't lose your self-worth. The dial was in your hands once, and somewhere along the way, you let someone else hold it. And they kept adjusting it to the level that worked best for the dynamic they were running. And here's the part that changes everything. The switch was never theirs. It was always yours. You just forgot you were standing right next to it the whole time. The moment you stop letting the system set the brightness level and start reclaiming the things that reminded you of who you actually are, the room starts getting brighter. Not because someone finally recognized you, not because the dynamic changed, because you picked up the dial and turned it back up yourself. Now you have a choice. You can keep doing what the confident space has always told you to do, affirm your way through it, reframe your self-talk, challenge your negative perceptions, while the system that turned the dial down stays completely untouched. That keeps the brightness exactly where the dynamic needs it. Or you can recognize what actually happened, that your confidence and self-worth were never the problem, that someone else held the dial for too long, and that reclaiming them starts with going back to the things that reminded you of who you are before the system told you who to be. 1 degree at a time, the same way it came down, quietly, cleanly, permanently. This was never just about confidence. This was about power, authority, and who was allowed to control it. This channel is for women who are done being told the problem lives inside them. If you're ready to understand the power dynamic behind why your confidence dimmed and what it actually takes to turn it back up, subscribe. Because on this channel, we break down how power, leverage, and authority actually move in real life.